My first memory of him was when I was 4. I remember laying in bed with my blankets pulled up to my chin, staring at the ceiling. He walked through an unseen door in the corner of my room. He introduced himself.
"Sleep is here."
His voice echoed like a cathedral choir, a low, almost haunting tone, practically soothing if it wasn't coming from a slender and hunched shadow figure. Even though this was the earliest memory, I could feel that I have known sleep my entire life. He took a long stride from the corner of the room to a seated position at the edge of my bed.
"It's time for you to close your eyes. Don't open them, or I will hurt you."
I wasn't scared. Not then. This is how I slept. I waited until dawn. This was how all boys slept. The reason this particular memory of sleep was etched into my brain, though, was the curious reaction from my parents. 4-year-old me felt the sun touch my cheek. I knew then it was safe, that he was gone. I opened my eyes to a new day. I walked down the stairs to my parents already eating breakfast and drinking coffee. They were my superheroes. "Mum, Dad, there's a monster that sleeps with me at night," I shakingly expressed. I could sense the mood immediately shift. Even at that young age, it didn't feel comforting. I've skinned my knees enough time and been scooped up and kissed to know what comforting warmth embrace felt like. My dad stared at me with one eye almost closed, his head cocked as if studying me. Then my mother leaned over and whispered something to my dad. They both got up from the table and went to the other room. I heard hushed whispering. To this day, I wish I knew what they were discussing. The only other memory from that day is going out to get ice cream. I'm always tired. I'm always exhausted. I tried to explain what happens to me at night, and the teachers would call my parents about my imaginary friend. Sleep wasn't imaginary. He was very much real. As I grew older and into my early 20s, I stopped mentioning sleep to teachers. I apologized to teachers and promised to try harder. The school suggested counseling. The counselors would call my parents about my imaginary friend. So I stopped talking about sleep entirely, especially because my parents offered no reaction. At the age 12, I had my first sleepover. I was the weird kid in school, so I wasn't popular, but on the other side, I didn't seek friendship. This was one of those every boy in class is invited sleepovers. The boy's name was Jimmy. I knew that he didn't want me there. I didn't want to be there either. I kept to myself, talked very little, had my pizza, had my ice cream from those giant Neapolitan tubs. We stayed up late playing hide and seek. I wasn't even aware of the time until Jimmy's mother announced it was bedtime. There was at least a dozen sleeping bags in the living room. I was getting nervous. What if sleep showed up? He was always there. All the boys crawled into their sleeping bags, giggling, laughing, telling ghost stories by flashlight. They asked if I knew of any ghost stories. I shook my head and passed the flashlight to the next boy. I kept to myself. Eventually, one by one, we all fell asleep. Well, except me. I lay with my eyes open, listening to the soft breathing of peaceful sleeping. Sleep never came. I lay awake all night, having the best time of my life. The next morning there was a frantic knocking at the door. Jimmy's mum opened the door and it was my mum. She was crying and shaking. "Get your things. You need to come home. This was a mistake." I quickly gathered everything and we left in a hurry. No explanation, no goodbyes. We got in the black Camry parked on the street. "He killed himself. Your dad. He killed himself. We're gonna stay at Grandma's." She was hysterical. I've never seen anything like this. "This never should have happened." We drove and drove. It seemed like hours. Quick bathroom breaks, snacks, water, then back on the road. We drove more. It was tense, quiet. We never spoke the entire time. How come I never met Grandma? I kept wondering. What happened and why are we going? I was full of questions, but I didn't dare ask them. The time on the clock read 7:14 as we pulled into a driveway of a small house. My mum got out of the car, then went to the trunk. She pulled out several suitcases and dragged them to the front door, leaving me in the car. The door opened and a diminutive woman opened the door. Grandma looked ancient from what I could remember. Skin sagging, eyes sunken with deep red circles, she made eye contact with me and motioned me to come. I grabbed my belongings and approached. "I have a room for you already set up. Let me show you. My name is Rita. It's good to finally meet Kim's boy. You look so much like your father when he was your age." She was sweet, caring, kind. I had another realization that day. I never felt that from my parents. After many years of therapy, I coined the term business partners. My parents felt like business partners. That sleepover and my first meeting with Rita was my introduction to feeling welcomed, even if it was forced or someone was obliged. I lay in bed that night, the blankets pulled up to my chin how I always do. Out of the corner of my eye, sleep walked in from the corner. He sat on the edge of my bed. I waited for him to speak.
"You kept your eyes open last night. Everyone dies. Your father wanted me to give you this."
His tone wasn't malicious. It was matter of fact. Sleep reached his long, thin arm to me with a piece of paper crumpled in his fist. I opened the paper and inside I saw the words, Now you know. It was my father's handwriting, all right. What do you want? I began to yell.
Don't you ever speak to me, or I will hurt you. You will never escape me.
He snarled. I sensed anger in his rising tone. I'll find a way, I hurriedly shouted at him. No sooner after I finished, he reached out onto my hand with his own and then grabbed my index finger and snapped it. I cried out in pain, but he held his hand against my mouth and put his face to my ear.
Close your eyes. Don't ever open them again.
Tears streamed down my face as I quietly lay in fear. For the first time I felt afraid of him. He never hurt me, never did anything like this. I closed my eyes and waited. I heard a knock on the door. Rita was on the other side. Your mother left for your safety, and for her own. I think it's time you understand. Get out of bed and meet me in the living room. I was so numb. I was overloaded. My curiosity was going to be satisfied. I showered, then got dressed and headed to the living room. Rita was sitting on a black leather couch with what appeared to be a photo album on her lap. Listen to me. I will hand this to you. Don't ask me anything. I know you're young. This is now yours. It belonged to your parents. Now they're gone. It falls to you. We will never speak of this. You will never speak of this. No one will ever be hurt again if you keep silent. Don't keep this in your bedroom. Put it back on the shelf when you're done. She handed me the thick book and walked out. Inside was handwritten notes, letters, pictures, dates. I was just so tired. Black and white pictures of people I've never seen before, names, family curse, sleeping sickness, insomnia, decades, generations, cures. Don't have children. This was too much. I wanted to talk to Rita, but after what happened yesterday, I couldn't. I knew deep down something terrible would happen. Months passed and I learned more about my family. Grandma Rita was full of love and I felt like I belonged for the first time. She insisted on homeschooling me to protect me. I protested at first, but then she pulled out a newspaper from the town I lived in. My old school burned down. Everyone survived except my class. The cause was unknown, but I knew. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't talk about sleep. My 13th birthday came and Rita baked me a carrot cake. There was something odd I couldn't put my finger on. If she was my grandma, why wasn't she in the book? No mention, no pictures. Deep in my heart I knew I couldn't ask. I knew what would happen. My birthday was still fun though, probably one of the more happier times in my life. That night was still the same as every other night.
Sleep is here. Don't open your eyes, or I will hurt you.
I grew older. Rita reached out to the school board, mentioned a medical condition. She was able to convince them that I should go get a high school diploma. I graduated high school. A week after that, Rita sat me down again on that familiar black leather couch. I'm going to die soon. I kept the promise to your parents, and now it's my time. Will you be okay without me? I will help you get a job. There is some inheritance, but not much, because, well, I'll help you out as much as I can. Promise me that if you do work, please only work in the mornings. Do you understand? Rita helped me get on my feet. I couldn't go back to my childhood home, but Rita promised I could have the house when she passes. I got my first job at a hotel working reception. I got a car. I started saving money. I was at a strange peace in my life, despite not sleeping, despite having this dark cloud over my head. He called himself sleep, but I could never sleep. Shortly after my 22nd birthday, Rita passed. She left the house, and I was suddenly alone. But I wasn't. I had sleep. I had my family book. I would go over it every month or so, seeing if I missed anything. This particular reading, a certain word popped out. Unobservable. It was followed by another phrase, speak not and see not. I wanted to test something. I bought a video recorder from a pawn store several miles away and set it up in my bedroom. I turned it on and pointed it at my bed. That night, nothing. Sleep never came. The next morning I went over the footage. It was just me. No shadowy figure, nothing. I wrote my notes and theories down. Unobservable. See not. See not. I went back to the section where I saw that passage. Sleep only come when one is alone. If he knew he was being watched, or if others were there, he would not show up. Dire consequences would follow if he was observed. A chill ran up my spine, and at that exact moment I heard sirens speeding past. I turned on the local news. A raging fire broke out and burnt several stores down in a city block. In the center lay the wreckage of the pawn store. No survivors. That night, I waited for sleep. I had the camera turned off.
Tricks won't work. You will close your eyes. Death will follow if you test me.
I knew not to talk back, but I had another idea pop into my head. The next night, I hid the video recorder underneath laundry in the basket outside of the room. I moved the basket inside of the room. It was haphazardly pointed at my bed. Sleep came as he always does.
Did you get it out of your system? You cannot escape me. Don't open your eyes, or I will hurt you.
The next morning, I moved the basket out of my room. I dug through the laundry and hit the stop recording. I really didn't want to see the tape. I needed the right moment. I went to a nearby therapist office and passed the receptionist a note about how I'm non-verbal and needed counseling over trauma. Over the coming months, I began building my case surreptitiously, note by note, session by session, weekly. I started with my sleep problems, my insomnia, bullying in school, my dad's suicide, my mum abandoning me at the woman's house that wasn't even related to me. I was slowly giving Mrs. Brown the puzzle pieces. After 6 months, I entered her office with a large bag containing the tape and my family history. Are you ready to begin the session? I think you are really opening up and doing so much better, she responded cheerily. What I'm going to tell you, you can't speak it out loud. Promise me this. Okay, I promise. We will only communicate in notes. Please remain silent. I didn't want to scare her. I began writing my essay, everything I knew. Yeah, it was crazy. It was weird. This needed to end. Someone has to help me. I have no one. I pushed several pieces of paper over to her. I took out the tape, and I took out the book, and I pushed those to her as well. Mrs. Brown was going over everything with a furrowed brow, studying intently. After a long 15 minutes, she was finished. That, she started. I leaped out of my chair and immediately put my hand over her mouth. You promised! I shouted at her. You can talk? She exclaimed after I moved my hand. That's not important. You promised. Don't say anything about this. Take the tape home. I will see you next week. I grabbed my book and ran out of the office. I think I just caused somebody's death. Hopefully, she understands. That night was the same as always.
Don't open your eyes, or I will hurt you.
The next morning at 8 o'clock my phone rang. Probably a telemarketer. Is this Rick? Hey, this is Deborah, Mrs. Brown. We need to talk. She hung up the phone. She believed me. That evening I was feeling vindicated, powerful in a way that I haven't ever felt. I wrote down my thoughts, a brief layout of the experiment I wanted to conduct. I'm going to wait until I see Mrs. Brown next Wednesday. Speak not. Those 2 words felt like they had meaning. I got ready for bed, as I always do. This time I wrote a note and crumpled it up in my fist. When I got into bed, I pulled the blankets up to my chin. The blinds were open and the street illuminated by moonlight. I did what he told me to do 10 years ago. I opened my fist and reached out to him.
A gift for me?
He seemed surprised. I felt his long fingers wrap around the note, then heard him unfold it.
Why me? There is no me. Don't flatter yourself.
The words drifted lazily into my ears. He must have seen my forehead wrinkle in confusion.
The arrangements from yesterday wears heavy on the child of tomorrow. Do you want a gift? Nod.
I'm even more confused. How come no one in the family tried this? Have they? What is happening? I'm not sure what's going on. Last time I spoke more than 5 words, sleep snapped my finger in half. The fear is coming back. A lump formed in my throat. I swallowed hard and nodded meekly.
Close your eyes, or this will hurt more.
I felt a shift in the bed as he leaned over. Suddenly I felt a cold, damp palm on my head. I gasped out loud. 5 fingers wrapped around my skull. Slowly I feel the tips of his fingers sharpen into needles. They dug into my head and then nothing. I opened my eyes and I was in the middle of the woods. From my vantage point, I was off the ground at least 10 feet. My eyes pointed straight ahead. I had no ability to move. In my field of vision, I saw a naked man slowly entering it. He looked familiar. The man has long black hair to his shoulders with red streaks of what looked like paint running horizontally across his face and chest. He had a leather pouch on a belt tied around his waist. I couldn't figure out where I've seen him before. He undid his belt and set it aside. Then he began gathering twigs, branches, and dry brush. After a neat pile, he stood up again and walked away out of my field of vision. He came back again with rocks roughly the same size, then started arranging them in a circle. Where have I seen him before? All the wood and brush he acquired went into the makeshift pit. He squatted down and started a fire. Once the fire was roaring, he pulled out a kettle. He sat the kettle next to him and pulled out some plant material out of his bag. He put the plant material in the kettle, then suspended it over the fire using a handcrafted pot hook and stand. Every couple of minutes he would give it a stir using a wooden spoon. Once it looked ready, he pulled out a cup and poured the tea in. He blew on it to cool it down. After it cooled down, he drank it. If this was a dream, it was very vivid. The sun was beginning to set. I was still stuck, still unable to move. It felt like an eternity. The man was sitting cross-legged by the fire with his eyes closed. Time felt like it was being pulled and stretched at the seams. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes felt like hours. Suddenly the man's eyes flicked open, as wide as they could go. His pupils were dilated. Beads of sweat began forming on his brow. He started making a low, droning sound and began pounding on his chest rhythmically. Thump, thump, thump. The fire seemed to join in the song with crackles and pops. I wish I could have shouted out. I wish I could have yelled. Is this a dream? Where am I? Why can't I move? I was stuck watching a man, high out of his mind. I still had no perception of time. Maybe 10 minutes passed, and the man leaped up into a ferocious stance. He started sprinting around the fire and began yelling. I call you, I call you. I will let you in, I will let you in. I need your help. His shouting was earnest yet desperate. His body was drenched in sweat, and the strips were running. After a while of shouting, I felt something. The first something I could feel this entire time. My fingers wiggled in my right hand. I felt my right arm, and it entered into my field of vision. It wasn't my arm. Sleep reached his arm out and placed it on the man's shoulder. He stopped running, paused, then looked up to where I was standing.
Tell Deborah I said hello.
The man spoke, but it was Sleep's voice. I immediately woke up, drenched in sweat at sunrise. I felt something was wrong. I called into work and told them I can't make it due to a family emergency. I fixed my breakfast of yogurt and granola and waited for Mrs. Brown's office to open. Around 8:30 I received a phone call. Is Rick there? The receptionist was holding back tears, I could tell. This is him. Mrs. Brown passed away in her sleep. I have to cancel your appointment. Her husband mentioned that he found an envelope with your name on it. He'll drop it off at the office for you. Please come by in the afternoon to pick it up. No, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have. This is my fault. I'm sorry. I really am. I sighed deeply. I can't reach out to anyone. I am all alone in my struggle with sleep. I took out the book of my family history and stepped outside. The cool air felt great. I felt sick. I'm so dumb. I knew this would happen. The image of the naked man was seared into my brain, though. I had to move on, figure out what to do. An arrangement. Did that man make an arrangement with sleep? How do I factor into this? I flipped through the pages and all of my family pictures, studying each face. There were pictures decades back. On one of the pages I found a family tree of sorts. I looked towards the top of the tree. Each name had an arrow pointing away from it, drawn in Sharpie and connected to a note. Died in fire, died in their sleep, died by strangulation. The first name there was circled, Joseph. I followed the arrow towards the note. Body never found. That wasn't the weird part to me. I looked at who he was married to. Rita. My grandmother Rita. That would make her nearly 200 years old. I thought I had a plan to help prove I'm not crazy. Now I need a plan to figure out what's going on. When Rita passed, she packed away several boxes and had me put them in the garage. Keepsakes and mementos. Maybe there were more clues tucked away in the boxes. I went back inside and headed towards the garage. I started pulling down boxes and moving them towards the living room. Rita loved being organized. She had written in black Sharpie what each box contained. Journals, mementos, photo albums, tribal. No one ever mentioned this to me. I opened the box and sitting at the very top was her tribal ID, and perhaps a couple dozen more. I picked them up and went through them. I came across my parents. At the very end was mine. Plain as day, my name, my tribal ID. I opened my phone and Googled the tribe. They were forcibly removed from several states away in the 1920s and came to the state where I am now. I looked up where the address of the main office was. Google said it's around a 20-minute drive away. I don't know what to do with this information, but I do know I have a letter to pick up. I drove over to my therapist's house to retrieve the letter from the receptionist. I needed time to think. Hi, Rick. Thank you for coming. Would you like to set up an appointment with another therapist? She handed me the letter. No, I'm okay. Again, I'm really sorry. Tell her husband I'm really sorry and that I'm going to make this better. I shouldn't have gotten anyone involved. I apologized and walked out holding the letter. I parked my car on the street. In front of my house, I pulled out the letter and I opened it. Don't blame yourself. Take care of yourself. Take care of sleep. I sat in my car with the letter open in my lap. My phone rang. Is this Rick? It was a man, someone I didn't know. Debbie was my wife. She was very upset last night. At first I thought she was cheating on me, but then she wrote down what you told her. I don't know if I can help, but can you try to explain this to me? He sounded sincere. Listen, I can't tell you. You're going to end up dead like everybody else. This book I have about my family history has numerous accounts of people dying. I don't want... I tried to explain. A book? Is there any way you could get me a photocopy? He asked. He was interested, but I'm not sure. If this is sealing my fate, and if I die, I at least want to know. Can I meet you? The book is at least 100 pages, plus all my notes and observations. What could we even do? I guess I do owe him an explanation. I do owe him answers. Okay. We arranged to meet somewhere. His name was William. He himself looked like he hadn't slept in years. I showed him how massive the book was and how much information it contained. Whoa! I thought my wife was crazy at first. I thought you were crazy. But if this is real, as she thinks it is, and as real as it has been for you, I need to do this for her. She made a promise to help. She made a promise to help you. He sighed deeply. We started the process of making copies, page by page. He was reading about my family. Even though there were no pictures before 1920, I filled him in with the information. I'm still processing about my grandmother Rita. How this has been going on longer than when it initially was written about. Several hours passed. We paused to grab some coffee and food. It all started with Joseph, you think? And this grandmother of yours was his wife. This is unbelievable. The shop closes soon. I don't know what we can do. Let's finish copying this, then I can come over and we can go through the rest of her boxes. You said she had one labeled journals. There might be more information there. We headed back to the store and finished copying everything. It was late. We took separate cars and I led him to my house. We went in and I showed him the boxes. I was so exhausted and so was William. Hey, how about we make some coffee, order some pizza? If I'm gonna die tonight, let's at least stay up until that happens. You're testing ideas. Let's call this an experiment. I haven't had a sleepover in 10 years. Even if it was grim, it could be fun. This couldn't possibly get any more bizarre than it already was. It was around 9 p.m. when we started going through all of Grandma Rita's boxes. Besides the tribal cards, there were other objects that looked like they belonged in a museum. Baskets, wooden carvings, pottery, leather pouches. I held one of the pouches in my hand. I looked it over. I think this was the one that was used in my vision. This was the one Joseph used in the ritual. I pulled it out and set it aside. I mentioned it to William. The next box I wanted to go through was journals. I opened it and there must have been a dozen or so notebooks. I knew she liked scrapbooking, but this seemed more than that. I spread them out on the floor, scanning each one until one caught my eye. Rituals. Rituals. We both spoke at the same time. I felt a sudden chill down my spine. My muscles started to tense. What time is it? I should be in bed. 11 p.m. How did it get so late? William noticed a shift in my demeanor. What's going on? He asked. I'm not sure. I need to be in bed. I need to close my eyes. I was straining to get out any words. Listen to me. I'll go through this book. Let me read it, he insisted. My eyes were open and I was staring at William, going through this. He was reading out loud and partially musing on what he found. Paint lines on the body to assist opening yourself up. Chant or beat a drum. My head started to feel fuzzy. Call out and be clear what you need. The room was beginning to spin and became disoriented. Let the witnesses come one by one. I was starting to fade.
Do you think you can ignore me?
Sleep's words spiraled through my body and pulled me upwards. There was just blackness. Rick, we need to do the ritual. I heard William panicking. Come back. His pleas were quickly drowned out by Sleep's melodic voice.
You cannot escape this. Your father tried, and so did all the fathers before. Joseph gave me keys to his lineage, and with this key, I will unlock the earthly realm to walk again.
It was all black. It was a void and I was floating upward, like a string pulling me by my head. My feet were on a solid surface, but I was unable to move. One by one, as if poured by paint, all the boys from the sleepover 10 years ago started circling around me. Once all 12 stood around me, then one by one they all burst into flames. I was then surrounded by burning piles of ash, and again as if they were liquid, they pulled all back to the position in front of me, then started filling in to other shapes from the bottom up. I quickly recognized my father. I wish I could say something, anything. He looked defeated as the image of him was completed. He pulled out a gun and put it next to his head. I wish I could yell or shout or stop him, but he pulled the trigger. All the viscera, gore and bones exploded out of him and started pulling the image of him. It was like a hose spraying, and where all the gore and the rest of him landed started to form another image from the bottom to the top. It was my mother. She abandoned me, gave me to Rita. Was it for her safety? Was the cross too heavy for her to bear? She looked panicked and disheveled. Her long brown hair was matted with leaves and twigs. The flowers on her dress were stained with mud. Her knees looked scuffed and bruised. I saw her running, then every so often changing direction. She was being chased by something or someone. My mother stopped. Someone had grabbed her hair and was pulling her upwards. A small slice appeared on her forehead with surgical precision. It went all the way around and yanked her scalp. A thick layer of her skin came off, revealing a skull with blood pooling around it. Her eyes turned jet black as she fell to her knees. With a huge, blunt impact, the unforeseen force cracked into her skull, cracking it like a watermelon. Bits of skull fragments floated softly into the void. She slumped over into a heap, again as if she was liquid. Her image was being sucked from the bottom to the top of her. Once she was a torso laying slumped over. I could see worms being poured out from her skull. A single, a couple, a dozen. Then it was a mass of wriggling worms, wriggling next to my mother's face, all soaked in blood and her brain matter. It was as if they were absorbing all the paint, all the colours, all the beauty from her. Then, like everyone else in this nightmare, she was gone. All that remained was a pile of pulsating worms. The worms formed two separate piles and began growing upwards, shifting and moving. They began to form legs. And once legs began forming, clothes began forming over that, and I immediately recognized Grandma Rita. When they reached the waist, I noticed a crack of light beginning to form where the torso should be. A slender light in the void, and the legs paused briefly while forming. They continued, forming Rita, going up, but as they reached the midsection, the crack became larger. The headless body of Grandma Rita began branching away from the light. It was a misshapen tree growing around a gravestone. The body tried becoming a cage around the crack and connected up to the neck. I felt my whole being, in essence, being pulled. Then a firm hand grasped my shoulder, and I was suddenly real within this nothingness.
You will never. I will give you the sleep you always wanted.
A familiar voice cajoling me to stay. I heard something different from sleep's voice. It's always been a beautiful cathedral choir of warmth, snaking its way through my eyes. Now there's a thin layer of panic, concern. I'm feeling more grounded as I'm staring at this abomination in front of me. The crack is growing larger, but it's still inside this birdcage of Grandma Rita. Far into the distance, I'm seeing something different, something grounded in more reality than what I am experiencing. I see William. I could barely make out anything else because the images were coming at me like a cartoon flip book. My focus began moving forward into the image, but the hand on my shoulder began tightening. Sleep didn't want me to go towards William. I needed to figure out how to move. I focused on where my feet were planted. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Ankle flexing, extension, muscles needed to work. I felt a strange dream-inducted momentum followed by simultaneously pulling and pushing. The center of my chest was being pulled into the light, then my legs, then my free shoulder, my face. The long, slender fingers began shaking on the other shoulder. In a brief instant, I lifted both hands up and grabbed what I could of Sleep's hand and arm. A pop, and I fell into the passenger seat of William's car. William screamed as he saw me come to. We were in the car barreling down a pitch-black highway. The clock read 3 a.m.
What the hell happened? What was that?
I wiggled my extremities and noticed I was clutching onto something. A long, slender arm attached to a chunk of shoulder. My hands widened in fear. William kept shouting. I felt the car drifting from side to side.
Slow down! Focus on the road!
I screamed back at him. The car began righting itself and William started to slow down.
I dragged you into my car. You just crumpled. I'm trying to get as far away as possible. We're almost to the next state over. I don't know what to do, except the ritual. I don't know.
William shouted faster than the speed of the car. He didn't finish his train of thought because the arm in my lap leaped towards the wheel and sharply pulled to the right. Immediately, we drove off the road and began rolling. Our bodies became the victim of gravity as we were thrown around violently. I was thrown through the windshield and hit the ground hard. It was all hazy, but I don't remember what happened to William. I must have been knocked out for some time, because I woke up in a concussed daze. The car was ablaze. I opened my eyes and stared up at the night sky. The fire crackled and danced around me. My head pounded. Thump, thump, thump. I felt like there was a huge puddle collecting in my chest. I couldn't move my right arm, so very gingerly I took my left hand and touched it. It was cold and sticky. I'm going to die. Sleep promised me
the sleep I always wanted. I closed my eyes and was at peace with the universe. My eyes shot open. I heard sirens, footsteps, shouting. Sir, are you okay? Can you hear me? A man's voice boomed over me. It rang over me, shaking me to alertness. Something compelled me to sit up. The pain had left my body. From the sitting position I rose to standing. The medic froze mere feet away from me. Sir, you need to lay back down. You have been in a terrible accident. You are at risk of injuring yourself further. I felt something was wrong. Something was off. My right arm, acting on its own volition, shot forward and grasped the man by his throat. The fingers wrapped so easily around his neck, I couldn't feel it. In the glow of the siren lights, I could tell that there was something wrong. It was pure black. Slender fingers. I looked down at my right side and screamed. One arm lay still, but there was another attached to my shoulder. I heard more shouting and screaming from the other medics.
I am asleep. Now I walk the earthly realm.
Kia ora kahoa. Grim here, and thank you for coming along and listening to this complete, he called himself Mr. Sleep series. Now, I've released this long-form video for those who prefer to hear a series in its complete format rather than drip feeding it like I have been every Monday. The idea behind it is I'll complete a series, combine it and release it. That way people who like to take their time and listen through can do that, and then those who like to hear it all as one are also able to complete it at that end as well. Now, I thank you again and feel humbled having you coming along with me. Thank you, and be safe wherever you are. Have yourself a good night or day, and this is Grim, and I'm, signing off.